Hello, and welcome to the Canadian Story, where we discuss what Canada is, what Canada could be, and what Canada should be. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Canadian Story. We're welcoming back one of our favorite guests, one of my best friends, Matt Enns. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, sir. Super happy to be here.
So last time you were on, we were having more of a Canadian Story personalized talk about kind of your journey, but you've been on another kind of journey, which is codifying the knowledge that you've gained through personal reflection and creating a method for other men, primarily men, but also some women, to take that knowledge that you have, truncate the amount of time and pain that they have to experience to learn those lessons. So basically, you've become a sensei of how should we then live. You've got kind of a way that you're developing, a path, let's call it. Do you want to share a little bit with us the first principles that undergird that philosophy that you're building, but more importantly, the methodology that you're taking to teach people how to truncate these lessons that you've learned yourself?
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack in that, but basically you're right. What I'm trying to do is take the journey that I went on, which is, a lifetime of pain and then, 5-6 years of really deep personal development, and see if I can pack as much of that as I can into a 6-month program. So I have private coaching programs, which you're familiar with, but this new group coaching program that I have, it's all of the same content, but stretched out into 6 months, delivered in a different format, videos, written exercises. And there are really 3 key pieces, which is, first thing is to help people understand themselves. And where I might differ somewhat from other coaching services in this is I really encourage my clients to look in all the places they do not want to look, because if you try to find the secrets to your future success in the places that you're already looking, you're not going to learn anything new, right? And the places where you're going to find new things aren't just the places you haven't looked, but the places you don't want to look, because if you wanted to look there, you would have. So that's the big thing I teach. And, when I went on this process myself, and I would say, of all of the hero's journeys that I've been on, the single greatest one in terms of changing my future was I went through an 18-month period. We've talked about this extensively. I went through an 18-month period where 1, 2, 3 hours a night, I took a huge dose of indica. And I basically asked myself, what do I not want to admit about myself? What has happened in my past that I'm ashamed of and I don't want to look at? And I spent 18 months on a daily basis looking at all of the stuff I desperately did not want to look at. And so painful. I recommend doing it that way. There's much better ways of doing it, but unbelievably transformative. And so I try to teach how to do that in a healthy way without having your whole life fall apart, to understand yourself, reprogram your subconscious mind towards, your unique path, your unique North Star. So once we understand ourselves, second thing I try to teach men to do is to create a vision, highly complex, detailed, sophisticated, high resolution, emotionally compelling. So you actually want to get up and chase it. Vision that's connected to who you are, your values. And then on top of that, we do the third thing, which is to align your daily habits with that vision. So adopt high performing habits, daily routines, exercise, nutrition, fitness, etc. So that if you keep doing these, consistent daily actions, your vision really has no choice but to come true in the world.
So I want to give our listeners a little taste of what this looks like. And Zach doesn't know that I'm going to do this, but I want you to do a 10-minute version of what you do with your clients with Zach. If you're comfortable with that, but you're pretty open on the podcast about your life and everything. So I don't think that should be a problem.
Yeah, let's go.
Okay. Well,
we're just going to publicly air out my dirty laundry, are we?
Okay. So I can't do all that in 10 minutes, but we can probably do something interesting in 10 minutes. So, Zach, what would you say you're struggling with the most right now? What's just not clicking in your life?
I would start with emotional satisfaction. I have fiscally had my best year ever this year. I have made strides in my personal life. I've made strides in my daily habits. I feel like I'm getting better faster than what I used to. but I am still not emotionally satisfied with myself over it. Like I can't seem to get to a place where I'm like, yeah, I'm doing a good job. Like I feel on top of it, even though I can read the data points and say I am making improvements.
Okay. So you're not emotionally satisfied. So what's the emotional outcome that you're looking for?
More, I would say more security. I still feel insecure in the sense that like I have built this apparatus that I am using to drive myself forward in life, my career, my personal relationships, but it does not yet feel to me like it is solidly rooted in a foundation that I can trust. And so I think that anxiety is where the dissatisfaction comes from.
Okay. So if you were to have that security and that rootedness that you're looking for, what would that feel like?
Well, I wouldn't go to bed with my head racing about what might go wrong next. I think that would be a good place to start.
Okay. And does that happen sometimes, all the time?
Sometimes, not all the time. Actually, fortunately, I sleep quite well. It drives my wife nuts, but I sleep quite well. I go to bed. So one of the best things I've done for myself this year, I read the 5 a.m. Club, and I started getting up at 4:45 in the morning every single day. And I am telling you, it is the best decision I've made this year. So I sleep quite well. I go to bed like 8:30, 9 o'clock, and I'm zonked. I'm out. But there is a period before I get to sleep where I'm just like, ooh, like it feels like a house of cards that I'm maintaining, but I don't yet trust it, you know?
Okay. So basically you feel house of cards means, you know, the slightest disturbance could cause the entire edifice to collapse.
Yes.
So do you feel like that's an analog for your life?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So if you were to, you know, not just have the feeling of security, but if you were to wake up a year from now and have a life that is secure, what would be different compared to your life right now?
That's a great question. That's a question I haven't thought a whole lot about. I don't, without spending a lot of time thinking about it, I don't have an accurate, I don't know what on the outside I would actually change. I feel like, and this is probably some of the stuff that you're trying to get at. I feel like outwardly, not too much has to change. I think it's an inward thing that has to change about how I look at what is going on around me and how I look at myself. I've seen in all of the data points that I'm looking at, I've seen improvement really in all aspects of my life year over year for the past few years now. But I have not connected the emotion to that yet. And I don't know why. So if I were to try to project a vision out into the future of what it would look like to not feel this way, I don't think the first place that I would look to isn't necessarily the data points or how much money I make or where my career is going or those sorts of things. It would be about how I would respond to what's going on. Does that make any sense? This is stuff I haven't thought very far into, so I'm doing my best here.
No, that's good, and we can probably call it there because, you know, what I would say right off the bat is you're lacking this emotional state that you want, but you don't actually know enough about that emotional state to say what you need to express that. And although, yeah, we want to focus on the internal state to create the external reality that matches it. But if you don't have any idea what would provide you with emotional security, you can't be surprised if you don't end up getting that emotional security, right? So something that would be helpful for you would be to, you know, create a highly specified vision. Here's what would need to happen in my external world. Here's what would need to happen in my internal world for me to have a sense of security. And sometimes what happens is when you make that explicit to yourself, and I recommend, you know, writing it down pen and paper, or at least on the computer, but pen and paper is preferable. You look at that and then you realize, oh, you know what? I actually have the external things that I need to feel secure. And then that internal emotional security can follow right afterwards. But so if you believe you have everything that you need to feel emotionally secure, it's one of two things. Either you're wrong, and by writing it out and making it explicit, you'll discover that. Or number two, you're right, but you just haven't taken the time to actually connect the specifics of your external life to your internal world effectively. And if you do that, then you might be able to actually experience that emotional result you're looking for.
Yeah. What do you think about this? Something I encounter, satisfaction for me comes in like the shortest little bursts, right? So I constantly have goals that I'm working toward. And even when I hit like a cool marker where I'm like, yes, I did that.
Zach, share with Matt about that great experience you had this summer where you took control and you solved an almost impossible problem, and everyone was like, "You're the man, Zach."
Yeah, so I had a great experience. It didn't feel like a great experience when I was in the middle of it. So one of my jobs is I work for a band, and we were going out and we were doing a show on the West Coast, and we the band's located in the Toronto area, so we shipped all of our gear to the West Coast that we need for this show. And for the first time in my life, I was taking on the job of tour management, which is something that I hadn't done, but I've worked for this band for a long time. So I kind of had an idea of what the picture looked like and what needed to get done. But it was the first time going out with this project where like it was my job to make sure that this entire ship got to where it needed to go and all the points were hit so that, we could do the show and fulfill the contract. And I get a call from one of the team members the day before I fly out at 7 p.m. I fly out at 7 a.m. the next morning. He calls me and he says, so the shipping company made a mistake. Your gear is in Nebraska. It's not coming to the show. You're going to have to figure it out. And, this band travels with highly specific sorts of equipment that are not easily replaceable. So long story short is I fly out, I go to the festival a day early. I meet with everyone there. We craft a plan. I basically stayed up all night the night before figuring out how we were even going to make it happen. We make the show happen is the long and the short of it. And so that was a very emotionally gratifying experience for me for like 12 hours. And then I was like, okay, cool. So that happened. Now and something else interesting happened in that moment. It was a big accomplishment for me. And it felt really, really good. And I noticed myself like really enjoy that feeling. And something that I took out of that is like, I want that next hit of that. That feeling of accomplishment, that feeling of taking on something that feels bigger than you and crushing it. But what I want, the question I want to ask is like, is that normal to just only feel like you can feel accomplished for like a very short time and then like I'm talking within 24 hours, I was back to like nothing new has happened. I got to go get the next thing. There's more that needs to be done. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, to be entirely honest, because it keeps driving me forward and keeps motivating me.
It's inevitable.
And it keeps me from being complacent. But I also don't want to like navigate my life feeling dissatisfied either. So where do some of those balances lie?
Yeah, so I think the balance lies in having an overarching sort of meta goal, a North Star that is going to be eternally out of your reach, something you can only, come close to or approximate, not something you can actually accomplish with any finality. And then having sub goals, that are in relative importance less than that meta goal, but that you can accomplish because, even neurologically in terms of like brain chemistry, you're going to get the positive emotion in pursuit of the goal more so than in attainment of the goal. And thank God, right? Because we spend a lot more time pursuing goals than we do achieving them.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
And if the pursuit itself isn't pleasurable, a short payoff at the end is probably not going to be enough. So the way that we're structured is actually to enjoy the pursuit of the goal more than the attainment of it. And that's why if you can have sub goals that are all sort of nested under this one meta goal that's not achievable, as you achieve the sub goals, if they're connected to your purpose, you'll get that pleasure of the pursuit of the hunt. You'll get the pleasure of the accomplishment, the capture, the kill, but you won't have that same kind of overwhelming, oh, like what now? if that meta goal is still not accomplished, right? So if you think about it in terms of battles on the way to a war, winning the battle doesn't give you the sense that, oh, there's nothing left to do anymore, because the meta goal, the war itself, is still out of your reach. So that's a very important reason, if we go back to creating a vision, you want to have a very emotionally compelling vision that you can then align your career, your purpose, your daily activities with, because in the alignment of your daily activities, of your sub goals, even of your, your long-term really important goals, if they're all nested underneath this meta goal of this is my meaning, this is my purpose, this is the ultimate outcome that I'm going to forever pursue and never achieve with any finality, that's where you're going to find the real satisfaction.
Yeah, and that makes sense because one of the other things that I do is I produce music. So people come to my recording studio with a song and they want to turn it into something that they're really, really, really proud of. And one of the first questions I ask them, that I started asking people 2 or 3 years ago, that I found so unbelievably helpful, is what are we aiming at? Right? So you come in with this piece of art that you're really, really emotionally connected with, and you want it to be amazing. Okay, well, what does that amazing look like? What does it sound like? Do you have examples of what you're trying to shoot at? And as soon as you kind of craft that vision and create that orientation of like, this is what we're going for, it informs all of the other decisions that we make through a production, which can be thousands and thousands and thousands of micro decisions. But those decisions become easier and more effective if you know where you're coursed to, you know where you're going. So it's I guess that's the same thing that what you're saying. It's the same thing that you're saying, just on an entire life sort of ideal. So let me ask you this, if you don't mind. What is your meta goal, and how do you craft an effective meta goal?
Yeah, awesome question. So my meta goal is to build an army of sovereign men, to help as many men as I can live and experience lives of strength and freedom. And discovering what your purpose is and aligning your career and your purpose and aligning your career and your life with your purpose, that's a lifelong pursuit. If you can get even an approximation of the purpose you have in life by the time you're 30, you're in great shape. But there are processes you can do to kind of break this down and more easily figure out what your purpose is in life. So if you want to figure out your purpose in life, rough draft very quickly, sort of 3 main things you need to consider. You need to consider, number 1, what your highest values are. Number 2, what your strongest personality characteristics or skills are. And number 3, what you want to see in the world. And a lot of people think that those are obvious questions, but even if we think about our skills, most people will default to, oh, my skills are, I work in a shoe store, so my skills are like selling shoes and knowing lots about shoes. It's like, okay, well, that's this deep of an analysis. But if you go deeper and you talk to your friends and family and you think about things you're good at as a kid and things teachers complimented you on and things your friends always say, oh, you're really good at this, you might discover that your skills actually are learning and teaching, or listening with empathy, or helping people clarify, their own wants and desires out of life. And so getting a really deep understanding of what you're good at will then allow you to structure your life around what you're good at. And oh, surprise, that's going to lead to a much more productive, much more fulfilling life, and probably a much more effective life, because you get a good idea of what you are good at. And then you look at what your highest values are, because if you're pursuing something that is not in alignment with your values, when you reach those inevitable times of fatigue, of discouragement, of overwhelm, they might knock you over. But if you're living in alignment with your highest values, you're going to be able to push through those periods of temporary emotional dissatisfaction. And so let's say your values, like mine, like freedom would be my highest value. Freedom, authenticity, growth, progress, and I put those all under the single value of sovereignty. So figure out what your values are. Then you say, what change does the world need? Maybe you think the world needs to be more emotionally supportive. Maybe you think the world needs to be more politically free. Maybe you think the world needs to be more inclined towards learning about mathematics, whatever it might be. Define that to the degree that you're able. And then you go, okay, how can I utilize my skills and my values to produce a world that has more of that? Right? So for me, I want to share my insight and my experience in a way that produces more strength and freedom in the world. And I found a way to do that with my coaching company. And so motivation at that point becomes somewhat secondary, because it's like, well, everything that matters the most to me in my personal life, everything that matters the most to me in the external world, and what I'm the very best at are all pointed at the exact same thing. So it's not that difficult to generate that internal drive, that internal energy to get up and work even when I don't want to.
Well, yeah, it removes friction when everything that you do is centered around the goal that you want to accomplish, and
Yeah.
accomplishing that goal is something that you even emotionally want to be spending your time on. All of it I can imagine that it would remove so much of the friction that people feel in their everyday lives, where they feel like they're spending their time doing things that they don't want to be doing for things that they don't care about, you know? That's an ugly feeling.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And that's why you see a lot of people, they get to some pinnacle of professional achievement. And, that can happen anywhere from 30 to 60. But let's say, you're 40 years old and you get to this pinnacle of professional achievement. You're like, there, I made it. I'm making $1 million a year. I'm made partner, everything. And then as soon as you get there, this incredible sense of dissatisfaction, of lack of fulfillment, it just begins to permeate your entire existence, and you can't figure it out. You're like, I have the thing I always wanted. What's going on? And that's like, well, that thing is either has no connection to your meta goal, to your meaning, your purpose, or you just don't have a meta goal. And so when you accomplish that thing, it's like, oh, it doesn't matter. And I was aimed at something that has no connection to who I am, what I value, what I want to see in the world. And oh shit, now I know that.
Mm.
Right?
So I want to go into this on a little bit more of a practical level in terms of, okay, so let's take you, for example, Matt. You were incredibly successful in your career and were, making what most people dream of in their whole lifetime financially, but you were dissatisfied. Can you walk us through what that experience was like of achieving that goal and then realizing that it meant nothing to you?
Yeah. So yeah, long story short, I was making a really good income, and I was presented with an opportunity to, double or triple that income within a matter of, call it 3 to 5 years, very easily. And so I would have been making like really high six figures, and I had been aiming at that for 9 years professionally. And when I got the opportunity, said yes, let's pursue this, let's make it happen. And then, pretty quickly, this sense of really overwhelming, just kind of sadness set in, and I couldn't figure it out. I was like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, I'm gonna have the thing I always wanted. And part of what made me kind of realize that this is not what I wanted is I had this realization, like, well, if you accept this opportunity, it's going to be a commitment to get it up and running. It's going to be a commitment to get it going. Even if you want to get out of it, it's going to take years to get out of it. So this is going to be a 10, 15-year commitment at least. And by that point, you'll be very much used to the income. You're probably not going to be able to leave. And so this is really, you're doing this until you retire. And I was like, okay, so if I say yes to this, that's another 30, 35 years that I'm going to be, an investment advisor, a wealth manager, portfolio manager, stockbroker. And I realized in that moment, it's like, I don't want to be that for the rest of my life. Like, I was aimed at this just for an income. And it's like, so what am I going to do? Have an income to live a life that I don't find meaningful? And I'm going to do that for the rest of my working years. And like this overwhelming sense of like, oh, this is it. And in that moment, I could have said, okay, this is it. And just learned to be happy and find meaning within that, which is definitely possible. But I had this drive that I'm meant to do something different. I'm meant to experience a depth of fulfillment more than I'm able to in this career. And ultimately, with help from other factors, I chose that other path.
So you've chosen this path, you found your purpose to train sovereign men and to create an army, not that necessarily you're commanding, because then they wouldn't be sovereign men, but this army of black belts when it comes to finding your purpose, driving towards it, and living a fulfilling life. Do you want to share maybe some examples? You don't need to use names of the success you're seeing from your students and how they're coming to understand the idea of being a sovereign man.
Yeah. Like hesitating to share specifics of any particular person. But I mean, I've had multiple people go from parents' basements to their own place, to owning multiple properties. I've had people that have gone from, working in relative obscurity to being in national news on a daily basis for months at a time. I was in the gym the other day. I saw an athlete, client of mine on TV. But, the professional success and the people that have gone from making very little money to making, in some cases, 6 figures a month. The most satisfying things are the clients who say, like, I have energy now. I'm present with my kids. When I get home, I'm happy. And sometimes that means somebody goes from being, a failing artist to getting a corporate job. And sometimes that means somebody goes from having a corporate job to being a failing artist, right? And that's very different for everybody, right? But when somebody finds their path, whether that results in financial success or in status or influence or not, when somebody finds their path and you can see the electricity in every cell in their body start to vibrate at a higher level, that's incredibly exciting for me.
So I've kind of experienced this myself doing the coaching with you. We've talked about this already, but the most interesting thing you just said, and I think that most people just can't really grab a hold of until you've experienced it, is you have energy now, right?
Yeah.
I'll dig into that more because all of my life up until a year ago, I did not want to get out of bed. I never wanted to get out of bed. The first thought almost every morning, no matter what I was doing, was I hate my life. And it wasn't like in that horrible way. It was just literally, that was the first thought. It's like, oh, I have to go and live this thing that I don't like. Right. And all the stresses of how am I going to pay rent? All of that stuff was always there. And it was just like, everything was always there. So I drank. And then in drinking, I didn't want to get up anymore. So I stopped drinking, and I'm even more miserable for the first 3 months. I'm literally like the darkest places of my life. Zach knows, Matt knows. I'm like low. I'm low. But now I don't set alarms. I haven't set an alarm since December, unless I have to get up at 4 a.m. to go drive down somewhere far. But in the morning, I'm up 6:37 every morning, no matter what, basically, unless I've had a really hard night the night before. That was an incomprehensible existence. That was not something that I could do. Zach is talking about how he gets up at 4:30 every morning. You've been talking about how you get up early. 4:45, sorry. 4:45. You get up early. It's not necessarily a thing that's being forced, for me anyway. Maybe it is for others. You've seen this happen. What's happening?
Well, I think there's two factors. In some sense, this is true for everything, where there's the material factor and there's the spiritual factor. And define spiritual however you want, right? But the material factor in terms of energy for most people comes down to what I call the discipline triad. And that's wake up time, nutrition, and fitness, right? And the key here is wake up early, preferably a little bit earlier than you really want to, a little bit earlier than is comfortable. Have a list of things that you do not eat. Maybe you can eat them on occasion, but really a list of things you do not eat. And number 3, a fitness routine that you stick to. And if you do all of those 3 things, your likelihood at having energy and having days that you enjoy living goes up exponentially, right? That's the material factor. And I think that's basically the foundation. And until you get the discipline triad in order, where you're waking up a little bit uncomfortably early, you're eating intentionally, you have some discipline, some control, some sovereignty over what you put in your mouth, and you're exercising the vehicle through which you experience all of life, your body, that sets you up on a material basis to have a more fulfilling spiritual existence. And then the spiritual existence, that really comes down to doing work that you find that you're good at and is meaningful to you. And so for men and, for women with a more masculine energy, that is basically inextricable from career. It's most people cannot find their purpose, in 45 minutes in the evening after a long day working at Walmart, right? Your purpose should be ideally connected to your career so that, 1/3, 40% of your waking hours are not spent unrelated to your purpose in life. They're spent using that well of internal energy towards a purpose that gives you meaning and fulfillment. And so when people begin to experience that, there's the material component and the spiritual component. And the spiritual component really is, you have to understand yourself, because if you don't understand yourself deeply, who you are, what you're good at, what you value in the world, you're not going to be able to build a life that's connected to that. So you might build a wonderful life for somebody else. You might build a wonderful life that somebody on Instagram says is the way to live. You might build a wonderful life that you read in a book is a great way to live. But you might be confused at the end of the day saying, I'm disciplined, I'm making money, I have this job people think is so cool and impressive, but like, I'm just not that happy. It's not connected to you, right? So that's why you have to understand yourself. Then creating the vision, you have to have this meta goal that's so fucking exciting to you that you almost can't help but have this deep, eternal, limitless well of energy to drive towards it, because it's not some small little goal that'll, going to the gym today. Oh, I can get up and go to the gym. It's like, no, living this beautiful, healthy, strong, fast, athletic, fit life that I can play with my kids and I can do things into old age and I can do jujitsu when I'm 75. Like, okay, that's a lot more exciting than like, well, if I go to the gym, I'll have energy for the day, right? So these big meta goals that are connected to who you are, a future you find exciting. And then the last part is aligning your daily actions with it. Because as you do that, as you increase your discipline in each of those three areas, it'll produce spiritual benefits. That spiritual benefit will then enable you to go back to that material process and deepen it and enrich it and make it more difficult and complex. And so you get this this feedback loop of, I get more disciplined and I get more spiritual benefits and I get happier, more energy. And then I'm able to get even more disciplined and then I'm able to get even more energy. And as you go through this process, instead of the opposite of that, which is my life sucks, so I drink, so my morning becomes harder. So I drink more, so my next morning is even harder. And it's this negative feedback loop on the way down. You get exactly the opposite. It's the self-reinforcing upward process. And it's amazing that the more energy you get, the easier it is to go do things that require energy and have even more energy, right? And that's that Matthew principle again. To those who have much, all will be given. To those who have little, all will be taken away. And that's not God hating on poor people or blessing rich people necessarily. That's just the natural law of the universe.
That's an interesting. I hadn't connected that verse specifically to that idea. That's interesting. As an example, what is your daily routine like?
Okay, so I have an unusual maybe daily routine because I change my daily routine a lot. And that's because I'm very high in trade openness. I'm a very creative person. I'm a very imaginative person. And so for me, I've done the 4 a.m., the 4:30 a.m. thing. But at a certain point, daily routines become stagnant for me and they cease to give me that internal energy that I need. So since I understand that about myself, what I do is on a very regular basis, I mix up my morning routine. So today I tried something totally different that I've done in years. And since I'm a very introspective, creative person, very thoughtful person, I said, okay, I'm going to, instead of starting my day by attacking my to-do list and by working, I'm going to see how my day goes if I start off my day by watching an episode of TV. So I got up at 5 a.m, went to Starbucks, I did a little bit of work. And then before anybody was awake, I went in our TV room and I watched an episode, a 45-minute episode of a TV show. And I don't know how that's going to go. So far, it hasn't hurt my productivity. I have a lot of energy right now. I'm feeling very productive. So I think, this might work. But that's what I'm trying right now. For the past few years, it's not what I've done. But what stays consistent about my routine is wake up earlier than I want to. So I don't allow myself to wake up comfortably and say, oh, okay, that was a good sleep. I always set an alarm and I set it for a time where I know I'm going to not want to wake up because I want to start my day with a sense of purpose, design, purpose over pleasure, design, not default, where it's like, I'm starting my day on my own terms. And then I go do whatever I planned the night before I was going to do. So this time I was planning to watch TV. So I literally started my day with watching TV. And then I tend to work when my kids are at school, and that's just a function of the reality of my day-to-day life. I work from home. If I try to work when my kids are at home, it's much, much more difficult. So I do the vast majority of my work between about 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. And then in the evening, I try to be very present with my kids activities, and then getting them to bed, giving them a healthy dinner. I try to do a family dinner whenever we're home because that's very, very meaningful to me. And then nighttime routine. I take out my journal, I rate my day, I write down what I'm going to do the next day so that my subconscious has time to work on it, plan for it, prepare for it overnight while I'm sleeping, because that's what your brain does. So I plan out my next day, and then I'll typically do what I call a visual exploration, and that's me closing my eyes, engaging all of my senses. We can get into this more, and going through an imaginary process with a specific end result. And after I do that, if my wife's still awake, I'll watch a little bit of TV with her in bed, and if not, I'll go to bed.
Okay. What benefit? I'm curious about journaling, because I've gone back and forth on journaling. What benefit do you see in journaling? How do you see it play out in your everyday in a way that makes you want to continue doing it?
Oh man, I cannot possibly recommend journaling highly enough. And again, with how my routine changes, I'll do 3 weeks writing down 5 things I'm grateful for every morning, and then I'll do 3 weeks writing down everything that I hate every evening. There's a million different ways to use your journal, but your journal is, in my opinion, a way of basically multiplying yourself. So you can create out of your journal a CEO. You can create out of your journal a secretary. You can create out of your journal a dialogical partner with which to work through the problems in your life. You can use a journal as an external hard drive. So, one of the things I recommend to you is, if you're having trouble falling asleep at night and there's so many thoughts in your head, take them out of your head.
Yeah.
Right. Just like a hard drive, take that off of your RAM, whatever. I'm not very good with computers, but like the part of the computer that actually helps the operate. Yeah. Actually helps, operate the computer with the information it needs, and put it back onto the hard drive so that it's not running in your mind. And I guarantee you, whether you get a 10% improvement or a 90% improvement, if you have things bouncing around in your head, and you write them all down on a piece of paper, they will stop bouncing around in your head, and you will be able to sleep. Even better than that, if you write down, okay, here's the 4 things that are bouncing around in my head, and here's, the 3 steps required to accomplish each of them, and you write down each of the steps, and then you write down when you're going to do them, you'll have a much deeper sleep. And not only that, you'll wake up and you'll get right into action, because you'll have given your subconscious the instructions. So you wake up and you're like, oh, those things that were these big dragons that I was afraid of, that I didn't know what to do about. It's like, not only do I know what they are, I know how to do them, and I know when I'm going to do them. So it's like, boom, it's easy, just go.
Do you do that just with your work, or do you do that with the more personal aspects of your life too? Because I do that with work. Everything. One of the best things I've done in terms of productivity at work is I create basically a roadmap for the following day at the end of the day that I've just finished working. So by the time I get to the end of my workday, I have a list of what needs to happen tomorrow, and it just it removes any of the you're right. It removes it from your brain so that it's on that page, so you don't have to think about it, which is de-stressing. But then when you actually get up the next morning and you get to it, it's right in front of you, and you don't really have to think about what needs to be done. You just you start attacking things. So you do that with your whole life, though. You don't just do that with your career.
No, I do that with everything. And I have multiple different ways of doing that. But yeah, I'll do that with everything. If I feel like, I'll glance at my son and I'll see a look of insecurity in his eyes, and I'll think, man, I really haven't been present with him. I really haven't been paying attention to him. Next time in front of my journal, I'll write down that I feel that way. And then I'll say, well, what can I do about that? It's like, well, I could go on a hike. It's like, okay, cool. I could either stop thinking about it at that point and have this idea floating in the ether that I could go on a hike with my son, or I could say, at the very least, check calendar tomorrow when you can go on a hike. Or even better, I can look at my calendar. I can say, oh, you know what? November 17th at 3 p.m., I can go on a hike with him, and then put that down in the calendar. And maybe that changes, but just by putting it down in the calendar and then, okay, I analyzed and assessed the problem, got awareness of the problem, I put a plan together, and it's like a concrete, actionable plan. Then that thought no longer occurs to me as like something that's just bugging me and bugging me and bugging me. Because if I let that bug me, the next time I see that look in my son's eyes, the look in his eyes might bug me, because it's a reminder of a thing that bugs me. So instead of seeing and being present to my son's emotion, all I'm seeing is that reminder that there's something I should be doing that I'm not doing, that I don't want to look at. And so I'll probably express annoyance and irritation at my son for showing his emotion on his face, right?
Can you? Okay, I want to go into that a little bit, because I think it's one of the things that you've taught me really well is often our reactions to other people are just an issue we have with ourselves. Do you want to go into that a little bit?
Yeah, almost always, because if something about the external world annoys you, it's because there's that same emotion somewhere inside of you about that thing, right? So you'll see people, forgive me for being crude, but it's like, you see the pastor who's screaming about how homosexuals are all going to hell, and then he's starting coke off boners on the weekend, right? And that makes it onto the news. And it's like, if there are things in life that really drive you absolutely crazy, that you absolutely can't stand, it's like, well, why is that able to affect you emotionally so deeply? Right? It's because that emotional pain is already there. And that's very related to the psychological concept of projection, right? It's like, if you have a part of yourself that you haven't acknowledged, which is, let's say, very, very hateful, you might see hate everywhere in the world, right? So you look at, for example, political groups that are screaming all the time about how people are hateful, everyone's hateful, everyone's hateful, everyone's hateful. It's like, there's a reason they see hate everywhere, right? So it's not coincidental that these groups that are looking for inclusion and love and acceptance and peace end up rioting, breaking windows, and burning cities, right? It's because they're not acknowledging something in themselves. And because they're not acknowledging that, the universe is sending them, or their subconscious mind is sending them signals all the time. Look at this, look at this, look at this. But since they refuse to see an internal landing spot for that, they only see it externally, and they start attacking it everywhere. Right. So what I do is, when I experience any kind of emotional perturbance, what I used to do is just react to it. But now what I do is I say, okay, if something that I see bothers me, I have to figure out, what am I seeing in that external thing that's a reflection of what's going on in my heart. And almost always there's a case, like somebody might be rude at the grocery store and cut you off, and it just makes you so mad. And it's like, why? And it's like, well, if I really think about it, it's because I can't stand a lot of these people, how they don't manage their carts properly, and they're always getting in my way and parking their cart in the wrong spot. And I really just want to ram their cart out of the way and be like, wake fucking up. There's other people in the grocery store. Stop managing your cart like that. And then I go, oh, okay. So they were rude with their cart, and I want to be rude, and that's why they're being rude bothered me. And once you go through that process, and then the next time somebody cuts you off, you go, oh, they must be in a bad mood, and they must be really angry at everybody in this grocery store, and that's why they cut me off. And then it doesn't bother you in the same way, because you actually get it, and you've addressed that anger inside of yourself. So seeing it in the world doesn't make you want to go, fight somebody, knock over a car, break a window, burn a city down.
And we talk about it all the time on the podcast. That's a huge dose of personal responsibility. Hey, I have this negative emotion to an external factor. Why is it my fault? That's a tough question to ask,
And there's, I don't know if we want to get into politics at all, but because I really believe in addressing things on the individual level, and that's how I've structured my life. But, politically right now, I think there's all these times in history where both sides are balanced and have their own ideas. And then there's other times in history where, yes, one side is, a solid mixture of good and bad, but one side really just goes right off the fucking rails. And if you look at the left and the right now, the only place where self-responsibility even has a small voice is on the right. And the left has really taken this idea that the individual is not responsible. The group is it's somebody else's fault. It's somebody else's fault to such an extreme degree that I don't see how they could possibly do any good in the world with power on any level. And that's a harsh thing to say, but I've never seen anybody look at a problem and say, this problem is entirely other people's fault, and this problem is entirely external to me, and this is a problem that I do not personally suffer with, and I have the solution for it, and I will go take care of it and do anything good. And I'm super, super worried about that, because the idea that personal responsibility is important is gaining huge traction with a certain group of people, in social media, online, in certain, political groups. But still, the overwhelming mainstream narrative is that they'll give a little bit of lip service to it, but personal responsibility does not matter. It is not going to solve any problems. And what that creates is this massive, massive group of people who are absolutely unwilling to look at what they might be doing wrong in any situation, because they believe genuinely, intellectually, that is not a way to solve problems. And so those are the kind of people that are willing to lock down people, prevent them from traveling, trap them in their homes, make them lose their jobs, and feel not an ounce of remorse about it because they are not capable of looking at, oh, maybe I did something wrong, right? And so the more people that I believe, I can teach the importance of self-responsibility to, the more people that I can get to look and say, okay, anything that bothers me about the world, it's probably because I hate that about myself. And I'm going to address that self-hatred, and I'm going to find self-acceptance and self-love, and then be able to love the sinner that I see in the world. The more people I can get to go through that process, and the more people the whole world can get to go through that process, then, a few steps down the line, the political problems will resolve themselves because
people will be resolving problems.
People will actually be resolving
because
problems.
The problem is almost always you.
Yeah, and any group that has problems, like I'll tell you what a group is comprised out of: individuals, right? And so like trying to heal the group and ignore the individual is never, ever going to work. And it's part of why so many important things are getting worse year after year after year after year.
Yeah, and it's a culture versus like kind of like policy or politic thing. There's so many people look to the political party to fix the problem, but the political party is comprised of individuals, and if the individuals aren't fixing their own problems, then the party is always going to have problems. And that's why I love what you do, because you boil things down to the individual level, and you say, okay, how can we influence a generation of people to say, okay, I'm going to take responsibility for my outcomes. I'm going to take responsibility for the outcomes of my family. I'm going to take responsibility for the outcomes of my community. And I'm going to let that permeate throughout the culture so that when we get up to the highest order of, whatever that top happens to be, whether you view that as a leader of a church or a political figure, when that permeates out through the culture, people are more focused on actually solving the things in front of them. And, I love what you do. I think what you do is so cool.
You're kind. Thank you. Yeah. And like you look today, midterms were yesterday in the States, and I'm in Texas. And in spite of the fact that people's daily lives are radically more difficult than they were a couple of years ago, in spite of the fact that every meaningful sign points to things getting not just a little bit harder, but maybe, disastrously, tragically harder in the near future, people still vote for the people who are causing the problems. And I cannot see a way out of this where we say, okay, well, what we're going to do is we're going to teach people the intellectual ideas about, how to better govern a country. And by teaching them these cognitive ideas about how to better govern a country, they're going to start voting in a way that's more likely to produce success. I do not think that's going to happen. I think the only way to get people to start voting for competent, responsible politicians who have integrity is to create competent, responsible people with integrity who then vote for people like that. I don't think you can teach ideas that are going to change the way people vote. I think the only way that, especially after seeing yesterday where Republicans won, looks like by a little bit, I can't imagine the extent of pain and suffering that it's going to take to wake people up before they start demanding that politicians aren't incompetent morons.
Yeah. What do you think?
And I think,
sorry, what do you think is driving the, like, how I struggle with this all the time because I come from a conservative family. I come from a conservative background, and maybe it just happens to be that there's a lot of liberal parties in power around me, so it's very easy to cast stones. That's also a possibility, but I don't understand what psychologically has to happen to people to look at the leaders in power, both in Canada right now and in the States, and go, yeah, those guys are doing it well. Let's vote for them again. Like, why? There's a break in psychology for me because I just can't fathom how people view it that way. Why do you think that is?
Well, I can answer that question. It's because people don't use facts when they're making decisions. They concentrate on feelings, and their feelings are a lot easier to manipulate than facts. So, for example, Roe v. Wade being struck down, the Democrats were able to convince a lot of women that their reproductive rights were under threat. And it didn't matter what was happening economically, because that's a dogmatic religion level belief. That's a core value. That's a purpose. Protect women, right? Protect one another. That's their idea, right? I'm not saying that is what abortion is. I'm saying that's how they think about it. So now you've actually gone underneath any facts or rationale or even the life that they're living, and now you've made it a moral crusade, and it's a very powerful tool.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. The reason why politics are so bad right now is people who are more susceptible to emotional manipulation make up the majority of the voting population. And so, like I just heard the stat the other day. This was from, I think, either 2020 or 2021. But 50% of Democrats believed that there was a 50% chance that COVID would hospitalize you. Right?
Yeah, I heard that.
A cursory glance at the facts would prove very quickly that that is orders of magnitude off. And yet half of them believe that, right? And they have not been facted into that belief. They've been terrified into that belief. And so the only way that anything is going to change is when people start saying, okay, the facts matter more than my emotions. And how humans get to conclusions on things is we feel something about it, and then we find facts that confirm that feeling. And the only way out of that is pain, unfortunately, right? So it's like admitting that you're wrong, admitting that the way you view the world is wrong, admitting that you've advocated policies that have caused massive pain and massive suffering for many, many people, and you did so casually and with arrogance and with total ignorance of the facts. That's a very painful admission. And the only thing that's more painful than that isn't 10% inflation, isn't even economic loss, isn't empty shelves at grocery stores, isn't political disunity and fighting and cities burning. The only thing more painful than that probably will be famine, war, prolonged economic, severe depression. And that kind of pain will cause people to say, oh, okay, the pain of believing in my own goodness and my own intelligence is now less painful than the pain of my day-to-day existence. And until that happens, I think we can look forward to more incompetence. And that incompetence will increase and increase and increase until we see some serious, terrible, traumatic, tragic pain. And that will be enough to wake up enough people to say, maybe I should vote based on reality instead of based on what confirms my existing emotions.
Do you think that pain is far off? That's a really good summary. Do you think that pain is far off? Like, what is your outlook for the next 10 years of, I mean, you're in the States, but both of our countries, because we're very intertwined, right? Are we in trouble to your best estimation? Like, do you think that pain is coming, or is there a different route?
I do not see any way out of it at this point. I think that if you look at things historically in terms of generational patterns, we're at the fourth turning, and the fourth turning, the last one was World War II, really. And these tend to be generational, global, societal traumas that are great enough to cause hard enough times to produce hard men again.
Okay.
And
so here,
yeah.
So here is the follow-up question then. As a sovereign man, understanding that is the future, what is your responsibility?
Okay, great question. I think as we approach tragic and traumatic times ahead, our responsibility is to voluntarily adopt suffering so that we can become hard in advance of the hard times. Because all of us are going to be required to get hard. And there are going to be a lot of very pathetic, weak soy boys walking around right now that 15 years from now are going to be hard, dangerous, formidable, capable men. And they're going to be made so by a crisis that will kill them if they don't. And some are not going to make it through that. And so the more men that we can have that adopt voluntarily hardship on a daily basis to strengthen themselves, that those men are going to be the ones that are going to help us get through whatever comes next. And so I greatly admire people like, David and others that I know who are really close to my heart, who are working hard politically on the cause of freedom. And I think that's absolutely necessary, and that can never stop. But I think the only thing that's really going to get us through the war, the famine, the depression, whatever it is, whatever hardship that's coming next, the only thing that's going to get us through that is hard men that people can rely on during that time. And so every single one that we can get to become hard enough to withstand whatever comes next, the better the chance that, global humanity has of getting through it.
So what are you doing to voluntarily expose yourself to suffering?
Great question. So the first and most important thing, like I said, is looking at the things about yourself you don't want to look at, because there is nothing more painful than that. No marathon, no ice bath, nothing is more painful than looking at the part of yourself. And if you need some help with that, ask your wife, she'll let you know, right, where to start.
No,
other things,
no truer words have ever been spoken.
And I think, the discipline triad that I talked about, waking up earlier than you want to every day makes you a little bit harder every day. Not eating junk food. I haven't had a bite of candy in probably 18 months, not a single bite. And it's like, that makes you a little bit stronger.
And your your brother or your son literally talks about this with his friends, right? It's a thing that he says, my dad never eats candy.
Yeah. And, I didn't do it I didn't really think about my son's admiration, but both my kids talk with like pride about how my dad doesn't eat candy. He's the healthiest man in the world. It's like, I'm not the healthiest man in the world, but I do not eat candy. And, because when you choose to wake up before you want to, when you choose not to eat any food for pleasure and eat exclusively for purpose, for effectiveness, for outcome, when you go to the gym because you want to be physically ready for whatever comes next, and when you do these things, make these little decisions 50, 100 times a day, you stack up all of those wins, you stack up all those tough decisions. After 3 years of that, you're a monster compared to who you were. Like, if I was to meet 29-year-old me, there's not a single thing that he would be competitive with me at anything. And it's because I've developed resilience in hardship, and I've developed the ability to make decisions based on purpose over comfort. And I've voluntarily adopted discomfort, micro discomforts on a daily basis. Now, if you want to hack this process and get there quicker, do a rite of passage, do something insanely difficult that might kill you, do something that risks your life, because it's so damn difficult. And you can accomplish that in 72 hours. And the psychological effects of that will ripple for another year. But I think the most effective thing we can do is just start adopting voluntary discomfort into your day. And if you're a white belt at it, be a white belt at it, because the way to get to black belt is to start at white belt. And so, maybe you start by making halfway through your shower, you do 15 seconds of cold showering. Great. You're a little bit better at discomfort than you were yesterday. And if you increase that every few days or every few weeks over time, all of a sudden after a year, you're doing 5 minutes in a bath full of ice.
And maybe,
right? It's like,
and I'd love your thoughts on this, Matt, but maybe as you approach, and basically it's like acclimatizing yourself to discomfort. So the next time something you don't want to address pops its head up, instead of pushing it away, avoiding it, not touching it because it's discomfortable, you're like, oh, I need to solve this problem. I'm going to now lean into the discomfort. Yeah,
you retrain your brain to face hardship rather than turn away from it. And what a child does, what a boy does, is faced with a stimulus, has an emotional reaction, bases response on emotional reaction. What a man does is sees a stimulus, considers how it relates to the long-term best in the world, and then acts according to that, irrespective of his emotional reaction. And so retraining your brain to take executable action based on purpose and based on outcome, rather than based on your emotional feelings and based on self-indulgent and kind of comfort seeking, that's a radically different way to live. And like anything else in life, it's an acquirable skill. It's something that as you practice, you get better at it. And, I used to be, and I don't say this with any exaggeration, I used to be the most self-indulgent person that I know. I never got up early. I slept in every day. I stayed up as late as I felt like every single night, doing whatever I wanted to do. I drank every day. I smoked every day. I ate shitty food all the time. And I did this for years and years and years. And there was nobody more lazy, self-indulgent, and weak than me. And I began to change that a small amount at a time. And Dave is laughing because he knows how true it is. A small amount at a time until now, like I look at the way I live and I'm very, very, I only indulge when I decide it's good for me to indulge. And my indulgences now are, what I would consider an indulgence. If I take 5 minutes of indulgence now, that would have been the 5 hardest working minutes of my day 10 years ago. So yeah, you could, it's an acquirable skill.
So for the people listening who feel like they're at the beginning of that journey, who are maybe overwhelmed by the monstrosity of what it looks like to take on their life and to take responsibility, you were the most self-indulgent person you knew. For the people for the person who feels that about themselves now, where did you start? What was your first micro step that got you on the right path?
Jiu-jitsu. I decided to do jiu-jitsu. And again, I'm drawn to that because of my innate personality, but my innate personality didn't find a way to express itself in my young life. So, it'll be easier for me to go to jiu-jitsu than some people. Jiu-jitsu taught me to reorient my understanding of myself, because men especially have this idea that they're like, okay, well, I might be physically weak. I might never go to the gym. I might have no idea how to fight. But if something ever went down, like I probably got it handled. It's like, oh, bro, I see red. Like, you don't understand how angry I get. Like, I'll handle myself in a real life situation. And then you go to jiu-jitsu gym and some 120-pound girl taps you out 4 times. And you're like, oh, I was wrong. Right. And then you have to begin to recalibrate your self-identity to match reality, which is a very painful process. But as you do that, and as you get an understanding of how you relate to reality, you begin to actually be able to navigate reality more effectively. And you begin after a month, after 6 months, after a year to be like, okay, now after going to consistently going to jiu-jitsu for this long, I'm actually pretty good at fighting. And if somebody had no training and I bumped into them in a bad situation on the street, I might not win every time, but I'd have a pretty good idea of what to do. I'd be confident that whether I win or lose, I know what to do. And you begin to slowly develop this bit of confidence inside of you. But what I would recommend for somebody who is starting out on that journey is make goals this way. What's the minimum goal that I could achieve that I would feel better about than what I'm doing right now? So if you wake up between 9:30 and noon every day, and you say, okay, you know what? If I woke up before 10:30 every day for a week, yes, that's pathetic, but well, I guess I'd be more proud of that than the fact that I woke up at noon 3 days last week. It's like, okay, make that your goal. And once you hit that goal, then make it a little bit more difficult. And again, make it the minimum amount that you'd be proud of, right? And so some people, when they start working with me, they're doing 5 wall push-ups a day. So you stand against the wall, push yourself away. That's their fitness routine. But if you do that consistently, after a while, you might be doing push-ups on the floor. After a while, after that, you might be going to the gym, right? Just start and say, I don't have to be a black belt tomorrow, because if I try to be a black belt tomorrow, I'm going to get my ass kicked. I'm going to get tired. I'm not going to understand what's going on, and I'm going to quit. So reorient your understanding of yourself relative to reality. Admit where you actually are, and then say, oh, okay, well, you know what? Sad as it is to admit, pathetic as it is to admit, embarrassing as it is to admit, if I did 10 wall push-ups a day for a week, I'd actually be proud of that. And say, okay, do that for a week. And then do 12 wall push-ups a day for the week after that. Then add in body weight squats. And after 3 months, you might be at the gym. Or after 3 months, you might be, it doesn't matter. You're probably going to be better off than you are not doing anything every day. Right? So the best place to start is to admit that even very small things could make you feel proud, and do those very small things. Because if you train that part of yourself for long enough, those small things will turn into very big things.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. Unfortunately, we got to wrap up here. But
yeah, we're over time, but that's okay.
Perfect.
But before we go, if people want more help, if people want to talk to you, where do they find you?
Best place is Instagram at _sovereign_man. _sovereign_man. And I have, little videos I put up. I linked to all the podcasts I'm on there. You can find out more information about my, my various programs that I offer. And I check my messages every day. So I am available.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Matt. Yep. Thank you, Matt, for joining us. And I really appreciate your friendship, your wisdom. But I think what I appreciate most of all is that you've walked in a way that you've shown me how to walk in my own way, and you're helping others do that. So thank you for that. And I hope that we get to hear from you again in the near future.
I love chatting with you guys. I'll come on anytime you'll have me.
Thanks, bro.
Thanks, man.
We'll see you next time, everybody.
Thank you for listening to The Canadian Story. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter at The CAD Story. That's The CAD Story. If you enjoy this podcast, please share it with your friends and family. Let's work together to remind Canadians how great their country is.